Hi there. In this lecture we see an amazingly instructive game, giant Hein Donner against Bobby Fischer. So this is the Zurich tournament round 13. D4 from Donner. We see Bobby Fischer playing knight f6, c4, g6, and a fianchetto system. This is very solid generally and reliable. Okay, and now we have Fischer playing knight c6. We have knight c3 and now e5, and now white plays in a dull way, d takes. This is kind of annoying actually. If you're a King's Indian player, this is not the sort of position you generally want. Now Fischer plays knight takes e5, so he wants to at least exchange off the f3 king's knight rather than d takes. So that's the interesting decision right there. And although it extends the scope of the bishop can be a construction with c6 can be used to block that bishop. We see bishop g5, and Fischer volunteers the exchange of queens and blocks the bishop with c6, so hemming in that bishop. Now black does have an attacking point. You can already see in this position that whilst white has interesting bishops, it's black's bishop here that can actually incur further weakness with b3, and actually with a rook on a8, that's actually kind of useful by default to potentially undermine a pawn chain. So there is something interesting for black in this position, which is perhaps why Fischer didn't mind it at all, this exchange of queens or this. He actually went actively into this kind of scenario. So we see b3 in advance of bishop e6. Bishop e6 is played now. Knight a4, all the dark squares are concerned for black. We see knight d7, protecting c5, stopping that invasive knight c5. Rook d6. Now here, the most accurate move may be rook fc8, and if white doubles the rooks, then rook c7, and then the rook can be evicted, and black can get on, potentially after f6, with things, with a very nice position, with lots of things to play for. It's at least equal. So Fischer's move h6 might not be strictly necessary. Bishop e3, rook fd8. We see here, that's one perk though, by kicking the bishop away from d8, black can actually play like this. And if needed, perhaps bring the king towards the center later. Rook c1 is played, so not really that interested in that d file in any case. There would be an eviction with bishop f8 as is now. Rook dd1. And now g5, so trying to restrict this bishop now a bit. Bishop d2. And we see here bishop a3. It seems as though black's bishops seem more useful than white's bishops. The counterparts, the contrast is increasing between the piece counterparts here. f6, bishop c1, the bishop drops back to e7. Bishop b2, king f7. So even the king is a little bit better than white's king. Rook d2, and now knight c5, inviting trade of rooks and a trade of knights. And we have bishop c3 here. It seems as though, you know, white's on the defensive to stop rook d2. This doesn't look very pleasant. And in fact, Fischer now plays bishop d4 by trading off the dark square bishops, weakening the dark squares, creating an infiltration point on d2 now. This is looking very, very unfortunate that the king's not in time to stop the invasive rook d2. So we have king f1, rook d2, king e1, rook b2, bishop e4, and now f5. And yeah, this looks ridiculous, but bishop b1. So white's huddled into a corner here, and Fischer plays a5. We have king d1. And now, very logical looking undermining move here, a4. Very logical. We have b takes a4. Now, if there is one inaccuracy in this entire game from Fischer, the most significant inaccuracy, which is detectable, is this next move, e4. It turns out here that despite white having a seemingly horrendously passive position, white does have the annoying c5 move. But white played bishop c2, so actually white did have here c5, and yeah, it is annoying. I'll give you an example. King f6, bishop c2, and here there's bishop b3, and all of a sudden the rook, although active, is also double-edged nature of chess. It's a liability because of this c5 move. It's potential to trap it. For example, here, e3 is needed because if rook takes b3, guess what white plays, which is kind of winning. If I give you 5 seconds here. So this is a cautionary tale. Even if you have a visually crushing position, look at what white can do. King c2, king c3 is winning the rook. Yeah, in broad daylight. So yeah, bishop c2 was a mistake. It was necessary for white to play c5. And if the game continued like this, then here, in fact, e3 is needed, not rook takes b3, that would be losing. So e3, and this is just equal. This would just be equal. So yeah, there was a way, it seems, of salvaging things. Yeah, chess is a very resourceful game. So that's intriguing. So bishop c2, and now this makes things easier again for black to increase the advantage. The pawns are fragmented. Bishop takes c4. There's threats like even bishop takes e2 here, as well as bishop takes a2. King c1 makes things worse, but they are bad. If bishop b3, bishop d5, this is very unpleasant, that rook on the 7th. And for example, like this, black's going to be significantly better. So it is unpleasant, really unpleasant now. We see rook takes a2, rook b1. Yeah, these endgames are just super unpleasant. b5, rook b4, check. And now rook e1. And white's last bid for any hope, a5, this passed pawn. And it looks as though, well, that's actually quite difficult to catch, isn't it? We have Fischer calmly playing rook takes e2. And yeah, there's just not enough time to queen the pawn. The rook can come back here in 2 moves. If a6, you know, rook here, and then the rook's in time. So, you know, white played king c1, stop maybe rook d2. But now Fischer played e3. In fact, there wasn't even any need for e3, believe it or not. Even though this looks scary, black could actually play rook takes f2 here and queen his own pawn. For example, like this, check. And then it doesn't matter about the token check there, black's winning that. So we see e3. Well, this is good enough. Rook takes e3 and then get behind that pawn after taking the bishops off there. And this is just totally lost position, 2 pawns down for white. So that really dull opening, pardon me, let's just go back. After rook a3, king e6, the game actually ended here. White resigned here at move 44. If the game continued with a7, this is an example, then the king just goes to d6, c5, b6, and helps pick up that pawn. And it doesn't matter if one of the pawns over there is lost, it's still 2 pawns up, and there's a resource like rook a4. It's trivially winning, essentially, after king e6. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting game, showing white playing a very dull, obnoxious, I would say, way. So the key points for me, personally, the takeaways here, knight takes e5, at least exchange off one pair of knights here. Don't be content with d takes with continual pressure from that knight. Get the knights off here, try and blunt the opponent's bishops. So systematically, first it was the light square bishop trying to be blunted, and later we saw the dark square bishop kind of blunted. And also black's bishop seemingly superior here, in superior positions. So bishops both blunted, e5 and c6 respectively. And this undermine of the pawn chain on the queenside, not minding exchange of rooks, this slow undermine, and the infiltration here, bishop d4, forcing an infiltration to the 7th rank. But despite all this totally visually crushing position, it seems e4 is in an accuracy. Yeah, I think chess is cruel. If we look at this under the microscope, yeah, it seems bishop takes c4, which is counterintuitive in some way, allowing f5 to drop. But it would have been the most accurate way of playing. You know, that hits the f5. This would have been the most accurate way of playing the position. So there was a slight chance for c5, but white misses that and just continues to go completely downhill. So very much, you know, 95% plus of the game totally outplayed. Just only a tiny fraction of the game where there was an opportunity. So it's no wonder many people commenting on this game think, you know, it's very, very instructive play from Fischer. Yes. Only one tiny wrinkle can be picked up. I think it's important to mention these tiny wrinkles because, you know, sometimes we often think, you know, positions play themselves when they're totally visually crushing, but you have to have some care and attention. There's a double-edged nature of things. You know, the rook being trapped horrifically there in that variation we saw is interesting. Just be alert of the opponent's resources as well. Yeah. So, okay. Hope you got something from this one. Very interesting. Thanks very much. Hi guys. If you enjoyed this video lecture, you might want to get more at my course, Kingscrusher TV/Bobby Fischer, which I had a blast creating, over 25 hours of video content. I tried to get the most instructive juice out of every single game covered and picking the most important games from this period. I had an absolute blast creating it, and I think you'll have an absolute blast checking it out. And it's at a big discount code with this link, you know, Kingscrusher TV/Bobby Fischer has the discount code. So I hope you do check that out. Thanks very much.